What is the principal difference? I'm looking for a principle. I understand you hate the president. I understand you love all of these rulings against him. You and I both know that's not a principle. You're a lawyer. What's the principle?
I'm not willing to leave without relief non-parties who are injured.
No, you're not willing to leave without the ability to bind President Trump.
No, I think that...
I mean, when it's Biden, it's okay. No. When it's Biden, oh, it's a travesty. When it's Trump in office, it's, oh, no holds barred, whatever it takes, right?
I believe in a powerful...
What was it that President Biden's staff said? We've got to do undemocratic, unconstitutional things to save democracy. Why is it the same thing?
Hello, Patriots. Welcome back to Signal 76, your beacon of truth in these turbulent times. Today, we're diving deep into something that should make every freedom-loving American's blood boil. We're talking about the complete weaponization of our judicial system and how leftist legal scholars are literally admitting on camera that they have different standards for Republican and Democrat presidents. Hit that subscribe button right now. Smash the like button and stay until the very end, because what I'm about to show you will blow your mind about how deep the corruption goes.
Thank you. Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it's great to have this hearing. Thanks for calling it. Thanks to all of our witnesses for being here. Professor Shaw, nice to see you again. Let me just start with you, if I could, Professor Shaw. You talked about the fact that there have been lots of rulings against the Trump administration. That's absolutely statistically true. I disagree with almost all of them. In fact, I think all of them. But the issue of this hearing really isn't the rulings, is it? It's the remedies. Would you agree? And those are distinct things. You may think that the ruling is quite correct, but that's actually not what we're talking about here today. We could have a hearing on that. Maybe we should. But we're talking today about the remedy. And the question is a remedy that binds parties who are not before the court, is that an appropriate thing? I mean, aren't you concerned about judges binding non-parties in their remedies? You may love the ruling, but even if you do, don't you think it's a little bit anomalous for courts to be going out there and binding parties who are not before them? I mean, is that something we want to encourage?
Senator, I think that judges have been issuing rulings that impact non-parties since Marbury versus Madison, right?
So you're not concerned about it?
I'm not. I absolutely think that they can be abused, and they have been abused.
Wait a minute. You were very concerned about it just a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
You said in response to a nationwide injunction on the Biden FDA's mifepristone rules, and I quote, "This injunction's a travesty for principles of democracy, notions of judicial impartiality, and the rule of law."
I think I've been consistent today. That was issued by Judge Kaczmarek in a single judge division. They're a problem. Those are a problem.
With him personally? Wait.
No.
So your testimony is if it's issued by Judge Kaczmarek, it's bad?
No, sir.
It's personal?
That is not my testimony.
Is the problem with the injunction? You were criticizing the universal injunction
issued by a judge in a single judge division. I've been very clear today that those are a problem.
By a Republican judge in a Republican division, then it's bad.
No, Senator.
Otherwise, it's fine.
No, Senator. I think that single judge divisions are a problem.
What is the principal difference? I'm looking for a principle. I understand you hate the president. I understand you love all of these rulings against him. You and I both know that's not a principle. You're a lawyer. What's the principle that divides when issuing a nationwide injunction is okay when it's not? When the Biden administration was subject to nationwide injunctions, you said that they were travesties for the principle of democracy. You didn't say the referral to Judge Kaczmarek was a travesty. You said his injunction was a travesty for principles of democracy. Yeah. So, in other words, the translation is just you didn't like the outcome. Is that right?
No, Senator. Look, we're talking about, I don't think Article 3 precludes this form of relief. So we are talking about prudential consideration.
Prudential meaning political?
No.
Then give me, so far I have yet to hear it. You've been questioned by multiple senators. I have yet to hear a principle other than the fact when you like the ruling, you think it's great to apply it nationally, including non-parties. When you don't like the ruling, it is a travesty for the principles of democracy, notions of judicial impartiality, and the rule of law.
Look, Senator, I'll say I think I am self-aware enough to know that my view of the underlying legal question, I am sure colors my perception of the remedy. I think that we should all acknowledge that. And yet I do think
that why shouldn't we stop nationwide injunctions for everybody?
I think that's
what we're talking about today.
Because I'm not willing to leave without relief non-parties who are injured.
No, you're not willing to leave without the ability to bind President Trump.
No, I think that...
I mean, when it's Biden, it's okay. No. When it's Biden, oh, it's a travesty. When it's Trump in office, it's, oh, no holds barred, whatever it takes, right?
I believe in a powerful...
What was it that President Biden's staff said? We've got to do undemocratic, unconstitutional things to save democracy. Why is it the same
I believe in a powerful president. I do believe in presidential power, but power and constraint are not at fundamental odds.
What is the principle? What is the principle? The legal principle. You've referenced prudence. You've referenced the judges you don't like. What's the principle of when an injunction binding non-parties, which was never done in this country before the 1960s? And let's see the chart, the Trump chart, which was done really only once Trump came into office for the first time. You don't think this is a little bit anomalous? You don't think that's a little bit strange?
A very plausible explanation, Senator, you have to consider is that he is engaged in much more lawless activity than other presidents, right?
You don't think
you must
this
that as
was
a
never
possibility.
used before the 1960s, and suddenly Democrat judges decide we love the nationwide injunction, and then when Biden comes to office, no, actually.
It's Republican appointees as well, Senator. And the 1960s is where some scholars sort of locate the beginning
Can you
of this.
identify
But
one
others,
before then?
Mila Sohoni, who's another scholar of universal injunction, suggests 1913 is actually the first, and others in the 20s.
The Republic endured for 150 years before there was a nationwide injunction.
Well, the federal government was doing a lot less until 100 years ago. So there's many things that have changed in the last 100 or the last 50 years.
So long as it is a Democrat president in office, then we should have no nationwide injunctions. If it's a Republican president, then this is absolutely fine, warranted, and called for. How can our system of law survive on those principles, Professor?
I think a system in which there are no meaningful constraints on the president is a very dangerous system of law.
That's not what you thought when Joe Biden. That is not what you thought when Joe Biden was
every president
You
is
said that is not what you said. You said it was
Absolutely.
a travesty for the principles of democracy, notions of judicial impartiality, and the rule of law. You also said
Supreme
when
Court
Joe
Senator
Biden
agreed-
was president. Wait a minute.
agreed
Wait a minute.
9-0 with me on
you
that
also
case,
said
to
when
be
Joe
clear.
Biden was president, you said the idea that anyone would foreign shop to get a judge who would issue a nationwide injunction was just judges looking like politicians in robes. Again, it threatened the underlying legal system. People just trying to get the result they wanted. It was a travesty for the rule of law. But you're fine with all of that if it's getting the result that you want.
Sir, the Supreme Court agreed unanimously with me in that case, right? There was no standing. The case should never have been allowed to proceed. And the combination of parties without standing and the single judge division.
No. We're talking. No, they did not. They did not issue a ruling on the nationwide injunction. You criticized the injunction nationwide. Listen,
issued in a case
we can
where
go
no
round
one
and
had
round on this.
standing.
Here's the thing. We've now gone 6 minutes, and Senator Kennedy had you for 6 or 7. You couldn't identify a single principled basis. We all know the truth here, which is it's not just you. It's most of my colleagues over here on this side of the aisle, who I respect a great deal, and they were raising very principled objections to the nationwide injunction just 6 months ago, maybe 9 now. And you're probably right. My point is that all that's changed in 9 months is the occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And I realize that my colleagues on this side of the aisle very much dislike that individual, and I realize that you think that the rulings that he has lost are fundamentally sound. We might grant all of that. I disagree with all of that, but we can put that to one side. The question we're talking about here is, should judges, single judges, district court judges, be able to bind non-parties who are not in front of them? And you used to say no, now you say yes. Let's be consistent. I would just suggest to you our system of government cannot survive if it's going to be politics all the way down. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can I briefly respond?
Sure.
I mean, you invoked democracy a couple of times there, Senator. Judges are part of our system of democracy. Democracy is not as simple as majority rule. Judges have always served something of a
You would have it be as simple as
function.
majority rule. When you get the majority you like, you're for the nationwide injunction. When you don't, you're not.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to give you the opportunity that I often found absolutely precious when I was arguing before panel judges and couldn't get my answer.
What we witnessed in the Senate hearing is nothing short of a confession of judicial activism at its most naked and partisan level. Senator Josh Hawley absolutely dismantled Professor Shaw in what can only be described as a masterclass in exposing liberal hypocrisy. This wasn't just a hearing, folks, this was an autopsy of our justice system performed in real time. For decades, our founding fathers established a system where courts dealt with specific cases involving specific parties. But starting in the 1960s, we began seeing nationwide injunctions where a single judge could essentially override the will of the American people and bind parties who weren't even involved in the case. This is constitutional chaos, and it's been weaponized against conservative presidents like never before. Senator Hawley brilliantly pointed out that these nationwide injunctions were virtually non-existent before the 1960s. Our republic survived and thrived for nearly 2 centuries without activist judges thinking they could run the country from their benches. But suddenly, when we get conservative presidents who actually want to implement the agenda that the American people voted for, these leftist judges discover this magical power to stop them dead in their tracks. During the Trump administration, we saw an unprecedented flood of these nationwide injunctions. Every single policy that President Trump tried to implement to secure our border, to put America first, to drain the swamp, was immediately challenged by forum-shopping liberal lawyers who would find the most activist judge in the most liberal district they could locate. But here's where it gets really disgusting. Professor Shaw got completely exposed during this hearing. When Joe Biden was facing nationwide injunctions for his radical policies, Shaw called them a travesty for principles of democracy, notions of judicial impartiality, and the rule of law. But when it comes to President Trump facing the same treatment, suddenly Shaw thinks nationwide injunctions are perfectly fine. This is the kind of intellectual dishonesty that is destroying our institutions from within. When Senator Hawley pressed Shaw for a consistent principle that would govern when nationwide injunctions are appropriate, Shaw couldn't provide one. 6 minutes of questioning, and this supposed expert couldn't articulate a single coherent legal principle. Shaw actually suggested that President Trump engaged in much more lawless activity than other presidents, which is why he deserved different treatment. This is the smoking gun, folks. They're not even pretending to apply the law equally anymore. They're openly admitting that they have different standards based on whether they like the president or not. Think about what this means for our constitutional republic. We have law professors teaching the next generation of lawyers and judges that it's perfectly acceptable to have different legal standards for different political parties. This isn't justice. This is exactly the kind of corruption that our founding fathers fought a revolution to escape from. Senator Hawley's questioning also exposed the forum shopping epidemic that has plagued our judicial system. Liberal activists have turned judge shopping into an art form. They know exactly which districts have the most activist judges, and they file their cases there specifically to get predetermined outcomes. The professor's admission that his view of the underlying legal question colors his perception of a remedy is perhaps the most honest thing he said during the entire hearing. At least he acknowledged what we all already knew, that these legal scholars aren't applying neutral principles. They're working backward from their desired political outcomes. This weaponization of the courts isn't just about stopping individual policies. It's about fundamentally transforming our system of government. When unelected judges can override the elected president and Congress through nationwide injunctions, we're no longer living in a constitutional republic. We're living in a judicial oligarchy. Senator Hawley's performance in this hearing should be required viewing for every conservative in America. This is how you fight back against institutional corruption. You don't accept their premises, you don't let them hide behind academic jargon, and you force them to confront their own hypocrisy in plain English. The fact that Professor Shaw couldn't provide a principled basis for when nationwide injunctions are appropriate proves that this entire system has become nothing more than partisan warfare conducted through judicial means. When the Biden administration faced nationwide injunctions, it was a threat to democracy. When the Trump administration faced them, it was necessary to protect democracy. Patriots, this is why we can never give up the fight for judicial reform. We need judges who will apply the law as written, not as they wish it was written. We need an end to forum shopping and nationwide injunctions that allow single judges to override the democratic process. This hearing should be a wake-up call for every American who still believes in equal justice under law. The corruption isn't just in the FBI or the Department of Justice. It's infected our entire legal establishment from law schools to federal courthouses. Patriots, this is why your voice matters. This is why we need you to subscribe, to share this content, to spread the word about what's really happening in our courts. The mainstream media won't tell you this story because it exposes their entire narrative about judicial independence and the rule of law. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and never stop fighting for the principles that made America the greatest nation in human history. The deep state and their judicial allies may think they've rigged the game, but as long as patriots like you keep paying attention and demanding accountability, we still have a chance to restore constitutional government.